Less than 24 hours after making a plea to the public to help identify the man who shot conservative activist Charlie Kirk to death at a campus event in Utah, police announced a major break in the case.
We got him. On the evening of September 11th, a family member of Tyler Robinson reached out to a family friend who contacted the Washington County Sheriff's Office with information that Robinson had confessed to them.
22-year-old Utah resident Tyler Robinson is now in custody. Investigators say they received 11,000 leads and tips and sent evidence like the high-powered bolt action rifle to a federal lab. According to investigators, Robinson etched disturbing messages onto the shell casings he used during the shooting. Meanwhile, as they prepare a case to pursue the death penalty, Charlie Kirk's fans and family continue to mourn his death. His casket arrived back home in Arizona yesterday. Vice President J.D. Vance traveled with Kirk's widow and honored his longtime friend with a final flight on Air Force Two. So what's next? Thank you for joining us on 12 Plus. I'm Tram Mai. Joining me now to take an extended legal deep dive into this case is criminal defense attorney Hector Diaz of Diaz Law. Hector, it's great to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
There is so much to this case. The shooting, it happened yesterday. Here we are Friday, less than 48 hours after that shooting. The manhunt has ended. Are you surprised how quickly this came about?
A little surprised, but you know, this is coordination between the Utah state authorities and the FBI. I mean, they put everything into this, everything. I mean, in terms of having, I think I read somewhere that within minutes, they already had, tactical, they had air cover, they had people there, blocking off the crime scene. Because a lot of times what happens in these situations is that it's that first few minutes where the crime scene gets contaminated, where evidence is lost. And they, I think some of the university police officers, they talked about this in press conferences. They knew a crime had occurred, obviously, and they wanted to make sure to protect that scene. And that likely is we're going to find out in the coming days, preserved a lot of vital evidence that's going to connect this individual, Tyler Robinson, to the crime.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that evidence, because there is a long list, right? We're talking, a family member said that Robinson spoke negatively of Kirk before the shooting. You had Utah Governor Spencer Cox saying that Robinson had confessed to his own father. You had surveillance video, messages on Discord that he needed to get a rifle, messages between Robinson and his roommate, inscriptions engraved on those shell casings found with the rifle. There were prints found. Was there one key particular piece of evidence, or maybe a couple, that really stood out to you to really break this case open?
Really simple. The law enforcement made the early decision to release surveillance photographs. They released pictures of this individual, and we all saw them on our phone, on our laptops, and that allowed individuals to quickly, his family, to look at this and say, this is our loved one.
They recognized it.
They absolutely did. And so they connected, his family members, whether it's his father or mother or his siblings, connected the dots very quickly and realized, okay, wait a minute. That's, they either have seen him wearing that shirt before, or, they recognize his facial features. But it was very quick after that photo that no doubt his father was having a conversation with him where there was some kind of apparent confession or admission, or, we're going to have to find out exactly what he said. But he admitted something that connected him to the shooting.
And that's where I want to focus in on, because of that admission, that confession. I mean, don't you think, for the prosecution, and again, is that a slam dunk? When somebody confesses to committing a crime, doesn't that make it so much easier?
You would think. I've been doing this long enough to know that there's no such thing as a slam dunk, and I think most prosecutors would agree that you still have to go through the evidence. You still have to review all of it. They have to know exactly what he said. Who did he say it to? There's a lot of information still that's going to have to come out here that to connect and make sure that you have got a complete story of what occurred here.
We know that, it's sacred for the attorney-client privilege, right? Or, if you say something or make a confession to a pastor, that's privileged. Is there such a thing as maybe a family privilege where a parent's son or what have you? Is there such a thing?
No, it's a great question. There is not. And so law enforcement very quickly, once they got this information, pieced it together that he had made some statement to the parents, to his father, I think in this case. They interviewed the father, or at least attempted to. Whether the father cooperated, there's some indication that the father's former law enforcement. And so, whether he sat down, there's no privilege there. I mean, they're witnesses in terms of what occurred. And, they're going to be diving in, not just to statements that his parents may have made about what occurred, but also they want to know a profile of Tyler Robinson. They want to know, was he heavy into any kind of political, rhetoric? Did he ever talk about, whether certain policies or certain things that, the Republican administration was involved in? How deep did he go into that? We're not hearing any of that so much right now. What we're hearing is just simply that he had expressed some disagreement with with Charlie Kirk's ideologies, and that's pretty common. There are a lot of people that, and again, my condolences to the Kirk family. Obviously, this should not have happened, but at the end of the day, I'm not hearing that this is somebody who is very politically motivated. I mean, didn't register to vote in the last, or he was registered to vote, but didn't vote in the last couple of elections, and so it doesn't fit the mold, at least at this point, that you had somebody who was this kind of, as we hear a lot of radical leftists that, wanted to send a message. That's not jumping off the paper here, at least to me. Right
Which a lot of people would think, that would be the likely motive, right?
Totally,
he disagreed with Charlie Kirk and his views.
Totally.
But so, if you don't think that, at least right now, which is still early, in this investigation, what would be the motive?
The FBI and local law enforcement are getting access to his cell phones, right? They have executed search warrants for his cell
what are they looking at?
Cell phones, emails, his laptops. They have taken every electronic device that's in that household, right? And they're going to look for a profile. They're going to even, there's some information out there that he was very involved in gaming. Right, on the gaming, on whether
wasn't there a connection with one of the shell casings?
It's being reported. It's being reported that some of the arrows, the configuration of the arrows on some of the shell casings, relate to a very popular video game, right? And so they're going to look at that. Is he on these platforms? Anybody who has children out there that are on Xbox or PlayStation, they know they can talk to other people on there, and so they're going to want to know, who was he talking to? What was he talking about? Was he ever, was he talking about violence? Was he talking about, maybe involving himself in some kind of mass violent act of some sort? Did he talk about politics? Did he talk about President Trump? Did he talk about the Republican administration? They're going to really dig in, and it's going to take some time.
And obviously call a lot of witnesses, including his own family members,
Absolutely,
right?
yes.
So how does that weigh in on this?
So I think that, there are going to be various layers that law enforcement go in. I think the big one is looking at the forensics, just to connect him to the crime scene, right? Fingerprints, DNA. They're going to look at that roof. They're going to look at, are there any prints on where he jumped off? We all saw the video of him jumping, or whoever it is. It's too soon. The assumption is that it was this individual, this Tyler Robinson, who jumped off the roof.
And prints were found.
Yes, they're going to
in various places. Yeah.
There's already probably a court order issued for his DNA in terms of what's called a buccal swab, which is to get a cheek swab of him. They've taken photographs of him, and all this is going to be via court order. And then there's going to be this effort to see if he's willing to talk, right? Undoubtedly, law enforcement have sat in a room and said, you have the right to remain silent. They read him the Miranda warnings and said, this is your opportunity. Would you like to make a statement? The indication that's being reported, at least at this point, is that he's invoked his right and he's asking for a lawyer.
Okay. Now, that brings me to my next question. Say you are defending him.
Right.
What does that first discussion look like?
Yeah, taking the viewers in that room, that is, a lot of times the assumption is to go in there and say, tell me everything that happened. No, not in a case like this. Absolutely
Why not?
It's too soon. It's too soon. I'm still collecting facts. I'm still collecting information. And I want to know, that he understands the situation that he's in. I want him to know that are preliminary charges that they're looking at, aggravated murder in this case. I want him to have a sense of the severity of it, but I also want him to have an appreciation that, he has certain rights that we're going to follow, that he has a right to remain silent. I'm going to counsel him and advise him that he needs to remain silent, that I'm going to be the only person that he talks about this incident, and that I'm going to come back, and we are going to go into detail regarding the evidence and the allegations and the information. But that first meeting that I have with him is to gauge where is he at mentally also. Is there some issue here that, maybe the media hasn't picked up on, right? Does he have some kind of mental health? Is he suffering some kind of psychosis? And so, I'm going to spend some time there kind of unpacking and answering any questions that he has.
And trying to figure him out.
Really. A little bit, yes, a little. But it would be too soon, right now where any lawyer that comes into the fray at this juncture doesn't have all the police reports, doesn't, if I pick up the phone and call the FBI and I say, hey, can you tell me, what's the evidence that you guys have at this point? They're going to say, yeah, we're not going to share that with you.
Yeah.
That'll come at some point when he is charged in discovery. They're going to have to give me all the information. Then we can sit down. I can have a talk and a conversation with Tyler about what occurred.
So then, again, knowing that this is still early in the investigation and you're still trying to glean information, about him and, trying to figure out his mental state of mind and everything else. I mean, is it too early to ask you how would you defend him?
So that's phase one. So that first meeting, once it's over, I'm having my investigators out there. Just like law enforcement has every right to go out and collect evidence and interview witnesses, to be able, I don't have at this point subpoena power because it's, I don't have the ability to go and get a search warrant because I'm not law enforcement, but I have the ability to knock on doors. I have the ability to go and talk to his family and sit down and ask his siblings, who are his friends? Who are his loved ones? Hey, do you have any other pictures of him? Do you have any other,
But isn't that what law enforcement, for the prosecution, they're doing the same thing though?
They absolutely, and I have every right to do the same thing as well.
Okay.
They don't own the facts, right? And so in order to defend Mr. Robb, which again, he's innocent until proven guilty, right? I had a law professor tell me that, somebody asked the question like, well, if you know he's guilty, like, why don't you just simply, throw the plea and just simply, have him plead guilty and that's the end of it.
And it's done, get it over with, right?
It's and that professor, and this is burned in my mind. And I know there are a lot of criminal defense attorneys that hold the same philosophy, which is it's in these kinds of high-profile criminal cases that you have to make sure that you leave no stone unturned, because it is in these cases where everybody very quickly will rush, and you can see it on the, in the reports on social media. He's guilty, like he did it.
Everyone's going to rush to judgment. Yes.
This is where mistakes occur, and this is so. Again, there are certain boxes that the government has to check if they're going to prosecute and they're going to seek the death penalty, and that is to prove its case. And as a defense attorney, he has the right to defend himself, and he has a constitutional right that he's innocent until proven guilty.
The fact that, and I'm glad you mentioned, clearly this is a high-profile case.
Exceedingly high profile.
Exceedingly high. And, when during selection, that's a whole nother, when we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. But the fact that he was so strongly embedded in the Trump administration and was good friends with J.D. Vance, the vice president, was, a Trump ally, a Trump supporter, and his reach was just so far just, truly his imprint was so powerful. Does that have weight for prosecutors to make their case even stronger?
Yes, there's multiple layers to that question. One, I think if there was some effort to say, this is why it was motivated because of this political rhetoric, right? That you had somebody here in Tyler Robinson that was so far on the left, and this is why he did it. Here's the story. Sure, that would allow, I think, the prosecutors to then complete the story. But for the viewer, I want to make clear motive. We hear a lot of this in the documentaries that, the motive was X.
Yeah.
Motive's not necessary in a criminal trial. It's the intent. It's only the intent. He had the intent to kill Charlie Kirk. Motive is helpful.
Right.
It is helpful, but it's not a necessary component to a criminal prosecution. So in that situation, I think that they would look at it, the other factor, and one that may pose problems for the prosecution at some point is, can we get a jury here in Utah right? Which is, you know, a somewhat red state, maybe even a red state.
An unbiased jury.
An unbiased jury that, you know, is going to be able to, if it goes that far.
Right.
Okay, and that's a whole other issue.
Exactly. Well, and that's another thing, and you touched on this too, the fact that, you know, okay, obviously he could be facing the death penalty, right?
For sure, and it's been already, I mean, the governor of Utah came out and said, you know, we are, you know, made it known we are a state that has the death penalty.
Okay.
So that is for sure on the table here.
Okay. Do you think that he could possibly take a plea agreement to, you know, just kind of like you were saying, you know what, let's shorten this,
right.
Let's get it done, and just make a quick resolution?
If, again, his lawyers are going to have the opportunity to review the evidence. They're going to have to sit down and really go over it with him, and a decision is going to be made in terms of what's in the best interest of this individual, of Mr. Robinson, right? And so sometimes there is the ability to get that early resolution where you take the death penalty off the table, right? And so his lawyers are going to have a very, very difficult task of getting through all of this, because there's going to be so much forensic videos that they're going to have to go through. There are undoubtedly so many cell phone videos that were probably sent into the FBI that lawyers are going to have to go over. But at some point, a decision is going to have to be made. Is there an opportunity to get the death penalty off the table here? Because if you go to trial, it will undoubtedly end in a conviction. And then if he goes to trial, he would face the death penalty potentially. And so, yes, you know, again, prosecutors hold that, you know, that card in terms of whether they're going to make a plea offer or not. And if they're interested, they're undoubtedly going to get, you know, some input from the family. Right? Charlie Kirk's family is going to have a say here involved, you know, what happens.
So I'm wondering, you know, is he the sole person you think involved? I mean, because I think about, what about, you know, the person who provided that rifle?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, are there accomplices? What are your thoughts on that?
The early reports are that he was the sole person involved here.
Okay.
But they're going to look to see, right? Who was he talking to? Was there any mention to his friends? Did anybody give him the rifle? You know, I think it's too soon to say whether there are going to be others involved, but there's very little doubt that that's going to be a component of the inquiry, of the investigation here, to see, you know, and talking to his friends, like, you know, again, this wasn't an assault rifle. This was a bolt action, I think 30-06, a hunting, very popular hunting rifle.
Okay.
You know, there's some early photographs of him with weapons, and, you know, whether he was an avid hunter or whatnot, so he could have had these weapons just there.
Okay.
The FBI, local law enforcement, are going to ask his parents to access to weapons.
Right.
What were his access? He's an adult. He's 22 years old. So it's a little different dynamic that we've talked about in the past, where a child.
He's not a minor.
Right, he's not a minor. But if there was some effort to assist him in fleeing, covering up, any of that, sure, those individuals could face very serious consequences as a result of that.
Right.
But there's no reports of that going on, at least at this point.
Right. And again, sources were saying, according to the governor, Spencer Cox of Utah, that he had confessed to his dad. Had his dad not encouraged him to come forward and turn himself in, then what? Would he have been an accomplice?
You know, no, not really.
Okay.
Not really. You know, I get this question a lot, which is there a duty to report a criminal offense? Is there that kind of, and only in certain situations is there a statutory duty.
Okay.
You know, it's a situation where I think you had a father that was a former law enforcement officer. There's some indication that they had a pastor that they had also reached out. That youth pastor, and he also was on some kind of U.S. Marshals task force. And so I think, you know, they just surrounded this young man and said, you know, they were ex-law enforcement. It was an instinct for them to say, hey, we're hearing that you may have been involved in this based on what you're telling us. Right. You have to report this. Yeah. You have to report it.
It is your duty,
yeah, I think you know, he was living in a household and surrounded in that kind of fabric. And so
when you talk about, you know, law enforcement, we look at the scope of this. I mean, the magnitude is so big. We're talking federal, state, local, county, everybody was involved in this. Not to mention, again, because he was so high profile and such an ally of the Trump administration, you know, I would have to think that had a lot of weight in this manhunt, trying to track him down, right? Sure. But I'm wondering, when you have so many entities involved, FBI, ATF, everybody, who takes the lead when it comes to law enforcement?
This is a partnership, but the FBI, I think right now, are probably taking the lead because a lot of this forensic evidence, a lot of the weapons, I think probably some of the digital evidence is going to go to Quantico. It's going to be processed by the FBI.
Right.
And the reason is that, again, no offense to Utah, but their forensics are going to be very, very different than what the FBI has access to.
Okay.
In terms of, well, they have access to different types of software that are investigative software to be able to pull down some of this data, some of this information. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
Our iPhone right here, most of us have it password protected.
Sure.
And so some local law enforcement, depending on the agency, may not have the ability to get into that phone unless they have the password.
Right.
Right. So if Mr. Robinson isn't giving over the passcode, which if I was his lawyer, I would instruct him not to give over the passcode. So they're going to have to figure out how do we get into that? And so federal law enforcement they have certain software to get into it, right? And so they are better equipped.
Yeah.
They have better training, so their manpower, they're going to be on this around the clock in terms of looking for prints, for ballistics, for did they recover a bullet in that case?
Yeah.
So they're going to match it to that rifle. And so right now the lead is being run by the FBI. However, there's going to be a partnership where they're going to share a lot of that information with Utah law enforcement and also Utah prosecutors so that they can build the case against Mr. Robinson.
Okay. What are the charges? What is Robinson looking at?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's looking at aggravated murder under, that's the most serious. That's the one that carries the death penalty. And then there's some other charges involving the firearm, using the firearm, the causing serious bodily injury, potentially obstruction of justice. But the aggravated murder is the most serious. And that's the one that, he's facing, being put to death in Utah.
And then how soon can we expect these criminal charges to be filed?
I wouldn't be surprised. I think by Monday or Tuesday, I think we're going to hear that, it's going to take some time. This is why that evidence is being sent over to Quantico so that it can get it processed quickly. If they are going to be presenting this to, say, a grand jury to indict him on the charge of aggravated murder, there's only a certain level of evidence that needs to be presented, and that's just not whether he's guilty or not guilty, but whether or not the evidence more likely than not shows that he committed the acts here.
Right.
So it's just probable cause is what we call it.
Okay.
And so I think they're going to get this very quickly back over to Utah prosecutors. They're then going to be able to present the narrative and go in front of the grand jury. So I wouldn't be surprised if by Monday or Tuesday we see the formal charges being filed. But he's held right now non-bondable. And I mean, this is, we're going to hear by next week in terms of what's going to be happening with Mr. Robinson.
So you talked about, kind of the next steps that law enforcement will take, more evidence, examining that evidence, getting into the nitty-gritty, FBI taking the lead, sending it to Quantico. What other steps will we see unfold in the next coming weeks? I
think you're seeing the Utah authorities doing a lot of press conferences, which is interesting. It is really interesting. And if I was...
But is that common?
It is in certain high-profile cases. But
well, because I want to say a lot of people, this has piqued so many people's interest. And again, like you said, it is high profile. And people want to know...
Absolutely. And very popular.
Everything about it.
Very popular figure. And, and so I think... to some extent, Utah wants to be transparent in their investigation. What we're doing,
and the governor has said that,
right?
Yeah.
And they want to show that there are certain steps that are going to happen here. So I think we're going to see more press conferences. If I'm the defense attorney, I'm watching very carefully what is being said in terms of.
So does that hurt or help having these, repeated press conferences?
Right.
Would that hurt or help the case?
Both. I mean, we saw this in the Luigi matter where. In New York, his attorneys immediately pushed back on the then, I think, New York governor, or the New York mayor, who was coming out saying, "We got our man, without a doubt." And Luigi's defense attorneys in that situation said, "This is wrong. I mean, you're potentially prejudicing our client's right to a fair trial." And so, here in this situation, his lawyers are going to look at the press conferences. Some of the, again, very similar. We got our man.
Right.
And again, the evidence is it's apparent that the evidence is very strong against Mr. Robinson, but we're a long ways away.
Yeah.
In terms
I was going to say, this is just the beginning.
Of getting to whether it's a plea or whether it's
Right.
trial or whatnot.
Right.
And, and so I would watch all of that with a watchful eye if I was representing Tyler Robinson.
All right. Great discussion. Hector Diaz, we really appreciate your time and your invaluable insight on this case. I'm sure this will not be the last time we talk about it.
For sure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. All right. And thank you so much for watching 12 Plus.